morning, everybody, and I'd like to thank you for joining this Fingal Chamber event. Whether you are a returning member or a new one, or attending as a guest interested in learning more, you're most welcome indeed. So whether you engage with the Chamber regularly or have a limited knowledge of our work, I hope to highlight some aspects of the offering which could align with your business priorities. Our mission is to empower successful, progressive and influential membership who drive a prosperous business community. Fingal Chamber is the largest business network organisation in the region, with 417 companies employing over 18,500 people across a very diverse range of industry sectors. Over the past few years, the Chamber has seen many changes and has been revitalised with a new team, fresh branding and updated service offering. We help businesses of all sizes to grow and develop by providing members with opportunities to train their workforce through our SkillNet programme, influence decision-making and policy, trade internationally, promote their business, and engage in important business matters. In relation to training and upskilling, the Chamber operates and promotes subsidised training determined by business needs, customised and delivered locally through our Fingal Chamber SkillNet. The benefits for businesses include more productive staff, improved retention rates, increased staff motivation, cost-effective training, a skilled workforce, and a competitive and progressive marketplace. Each year, members who work with us and schedule tailored training reduce their costs substantially. If you'd like to enhance your business profile or increase visibility, the Chamber has a variety of valuable channels for members to use. Amongst the wide range of advertising options and sponsorship packages, businesses can submit adverts or advertorials for inclusion in our new Fingal Network magazine and can sponsor entire programs or individual events. Indeed, our Fingal Network magazine, issue 2, is due out at the end of August. Members can gain access to weekly business community updates, which include the latest local business news, stakeholder notices, and information on key consultations. In the summer, the Chamber announced a new partnership with Adare Human Resource Management. This collaboration will ensure the Chamber members have access to expert human resource management advice on an ongoing basis. And indeed, the reason we're here this morning, I'd like to welcome Michelle McDonough from Adair Human Resource Management, who will make a presentation to us on the return to work protocols. So in summation, we've told you a little bit about our training course. I've welcomed Michelle from Adair. If you're interested in finding more out about the Chamber, please visit please look at www.fingalchamber.ie. And Michelle, can I hand the floor over to you?
You can indeed. Thank you very much,
and
welcome everyone to our session this morning. Delighted to be here with you and running this event in partnership with Fingal Chamber. So today, what I want to run through with everyone is an update on the return to the workplace and focusing on trends, key challenges, and how to overcome them. We're going to run for about an hour or so, and what I want to guide you through first of all is a bit of an overview into who we are for anyone that may not be familiar with Adare Human Resource Management. And then we're going to focus on supporting employee retention, being that that's one of the key issues and challenges that we're facing at the moment. I'm going to run through a bit of a general update on some other key areas of the return to the workplace and share with you some findings from our recent HR Barometer survey results. And then just summarize the top 5 HR priorities for the rest of the year and take the opportunity to update you on some recent employment law changes just to make sure that they're on your radar, that you've heard about them and know about them. And then we'll recap at the end with any questions and just summarize your takeaways for the session today. So as Anthony said, we have joined in partnership with Fingal Chamber this year, which is a really exciting opportunity for us to engage with the membership base and lead out in supporting organisations in the areas of employment law, industrial relations and best practice human resource management, which is obviously particularly important in times of change and us trying to regroup and focus and keep our businesses and organisations progressing and moving forward. In terms of how we can help the Chamber members, we are offering an Adair partnership programme to the members of the Chamber. And through this partnership programme, It offers comprehensive contracts of employment, whether you need one that's updated or you need a completely new template, and making sure that you have them filled out for all of your employees. We ensure the provision of a full comprehensive employee handbook, which is hosted on an online portal for easy accessibility, and it allows it to be updated quite easily when there are changes that crop up. We would take responsibility for keeping our clients in the know. So with all the changes that are happening, it's just not something you have to think about. We'll make sure that we bring to your attention anything that changes and that you're ahead of it all the time, and you're not waiting for that knock on the door from a staff member to tell you about their new entitlements or their new rights to something. You'll be provided with a dedicated client account manager, and they'll provide advice, guidance and support in applying all of those policies and procedures in the real world and being practical, I suppose, in their application of that. And then we also support with representation if you do have any workplace relations commission complaint that comes against you, or you do find yourself in the labour court. So they're the kind of key elements of the Adair partnership programme that we offer to the chamber members. And as I mentioned, it's about giving you that baseline of compliance support. So I call them the building blocks of HR, from your contracts and your policies, guidance, and having that one point of contact that you can build a relationship with, and they get to know your business and your employees and what works for you, so they're in a better position to help you actually apply that in practical way, you know, step 1, step 2, step 3, rather than sometimes these things can feel quite overwhelming when there's big policies and different situations to apply them to. And then practical support with drafting emails, letters, you know, guiding or coaching you how to approach a certain conversation, etc. And the representation, as I mentioned earlier on, if required. So we work with a number of key sectors, from first professional services through to retail, leisure, hospitality, the community and voluntary sector, manufacturing. So a range of sectors and a range of company sizes, from small SMEs right through to larger organizations. And for myself, I'm Michelle McDonough, the Senior HR Client Relationship Consultant. I'm also the Chamber Partner Manager, so I'd be the key point of contact for managing all relationships with the Chamber members. So if anyone does have an interest in further supports through Adair, feel free to get in touch with me, and I'll share my my contact details at the end of the presentation today. Okay, so if we just kick off then and jump into the first section, which is all around the whole area of supporting employee retention. And as I mentioned, I just wanted to start with sharing some statistics or some metrics with you on the results of our HR Barometer survey for 2021. So this research was conducted in March, across March and April of this year of 2021, and it was done by telephone interviews, which allows us to get a much more comprehensive and in-depth understanding of each business, what they're facing from a challenge perspective, and what their own thoughts are. And it covers over 32,000 employees nationwide. So it's a really good slice and representation of what's happening out there in the marketplace. We used to do this survey once a year, but with so much change going on, we're doing it now twice a year. So we'll run the survey again in October. And so it'll be interesting just to track those trends over time. So on the whole area of employee turnover, at the moment it's sitting at its lowest that it's been in 5 years. So we've been running this HR Barometer series now for the last 5 years. And the figures that are coming out now are the lowest that they've ever been, which is obviously encouraging. And the average, just to put that in context, the average employee turnover was 19% in 2019. And it was 8% in 2020. And so the expected turnover for this year in 2021 is 7.5% in terms of employee turnover. So quite a drop there from 2019 through to 2021. And for COVID hit businesses, because there is a bit of a difference in terms of those that have been maybe more adversely affected by COVID. So for those businesses, that the employee turnover is expected to be 9.8% for the rest of this year. So it just gives you a kind of a sense of where things are currently sitting from employee turnover. And then in terms of why people are leaving, what's driving that change, career progression was still cited as the biggest reason for why people were leaving their roles. So despite the fact that we're working in this unusual environment over the last 17 months or so, people are still trying to focus on progressing their careers, and that was 35% of businesses surveyed quoted that this was the primary reason that people were leaving. The other interesting point on this one was that change in career has increased dramatically. So probably not surprising for people that maybe found themselves not as secure as they thought they had been, that they reevaluated where they're currently at. But that was 3% last year cited as a reason for leaving a job, and that's increased now to 15% in the 2021 report. So quite a jump there. And again, for COVID hit businesses, they were twice as likely to leave for the reason of career change. So as I mentioned, that's probably more reflective of the lack of security that people feel maybe in those type of industries. It was 22% for COVID hit businesses versus 10% in the other businesses. So the main kind of learning point or takeaway from this section and from these metrics from our perspective is that, yes, the numbers are low at the moment, but we do have an anticipation that there is going to be a pent-up employee attrition built up into the system, and people will be looking for opportunities to move on and for that to rebalance to some level there between the 7.5 and the 19% over the next 12 months. So it's important for you to be focused on, although the numbers are low right now, it's still important to be focused on trying to support employee retention and realize that people can be mobile and can avail of other opportunities. And we're starting to see that a little bit now, even as things have already begun to reopen a little bit. So again, in thinking about, well, what can we do about this, to avoid people leaving and to support employee retention. So I've just put down here, the 10 steps to getting it right. And these are some of the activities that we can undertake and take control over to try and support people to stay in the business. The first one, and if you think about the employee life cycle, it's all about, getting it right from the start. So making sure that we're hiring the right people, and that what I'm seeing is that as things reopen again or business opportunities start to come in, that we fall into the old habits of jumping and going, I need to recruit somebody fast, I need them in here to fill a gap, and maybe I didn't foresee this need arising, but now there's a business here, there's a contract over the line, and I need to get this role filled. So there's a danger that we're going to jump in and just hire the first person that's available. I mean, look, hospitality are really struggling at the moment in terms of chefs and catering staff. So you're seeing this sense of panic, let's say, that we need to get people into the jobs. And it's just a reminder that it's really critical to take the time in your recruitment process to be clear on exactly what the responsibilities of the role that you're going out to recruit for, and exactly the type of person that you need to fit that role, and that you're just calming things down and taking a step to make that right decision at the start, because it'll take you so much longer to manage the situation if you take in a bad hire and you're dealing with managing probation, managing poor performance, or managing absence issues or motivation or any of those things. So that's the first thing. The second thing is inducting them and onboarding them in the right way, and making sure that there's very frequent communication with that individual. So particularly if people are being onboarded remotely and they're not having the same opportunity as they would to be on site in your business, it's even more important to take the time to plan and map out your induction process and make sure that they're getting a clear understanding of all the various aspects of the role, of the team, of the business, that they're being introduced and integrated with people, that they're having those one-to-ones and they're getting that opportunity to build the connections and the relationships, and that they have a very strong frequent interaction with their line manager or their supervisor, so that the expectations of the company are clear and of the individual are clear, and that you're clearly mapping and managing the workload that they have, and you're tracking their performance, and you're having those conversations early and nipping any issues in the bud. Because it's really critical that people just start on the right foot once you've gone to the effort of recruiting the right person. And then I suppose just a continual focus on performance review and probation review, because again, when things are busy and maybe we have less resources than we had before, there's a danger of letting those things slip. And and not doing them as thoroughly as we might otherwise do. And it's really, really critical. I always think the first year of employment of a new person is really critical to get that pattern right. But even for people that are with you 2, 3, 4, 5, and maybe longer years, it's important to keep having those conversations and keep focused on, you know, the next area of career and personal development. So are people enjoying their roles? What are they struggling with? How can we support them? And people are still focusing on their own development and their progression. It is coming out as a very strong theme. So we have to make sure that we don't lose sight of that when we're focused, maybe as business owners and managers on the sales side, running the business, that we might forget that piece of it. And before we know, we find that we're losing people. We're starting to having to focus more of our time and efforts then on HR rather than on the sales and business piece. So it's just important to keep your eyes on both sides of the coin before you find yourself in hot water. Communication in general, I think we're going through a real phase of change, even more so now as people start to return to the workplace. And it's really critical. I feel like it can go off the lines very, very quickly if we don't take a strong control of the whole communication as things change from week to week and day to day. And even today, you know, we had more updates today about the government not changing or not making any further changes until at least the end of September. So there's constantly things happening and changing, and we just need to keep our focus on maintaining communications with employees. And if we don't communicate, they'll fill in the gaps themselves. So, you know, just say what you know, say what you don't know, and then confirm when you'll come back to them with the next update. So that's just really critical to alleviate any anxiety and maybe to stop people actually just, you know, leaving a job. It might just make the difference. So improving work-life balance is also really critical. And again, we're going to be going through a lot of a transition between the things that we, you know, the good parts of working remotely, that people were able to balance their work life much better, and they were able to be maybe around for family, whether it was children or caring for elders or just time for themselves. So that is going to be a little bit more challenging as people start to have to go back to work. And so it's just to be kind of checking in with your team and being conscious of what their challenges are or what the differences are going to mean to them, so that we can support them or find out if there's anything else we can do to support that transition. Maybe it's giving them a little bit more notice to get things organized, or that they don't feel as pressured to come back as quickly as we might want them to. So it's just trying to work in tandem with people to figure that out. Improving working relationships. So again, this sense of sometimes feeling a bit isolated or separated from your team. So just continuing to focus on team building and you know, as I know the social part of it has been difficult, but just keep the focus on that, whether it's just, you know, I know a lot of the coffee morning chats and catch-ups have kind of lagged a little bit as people got bored of them. So just thinking to pick them up and keep some sort of connection going to support the development and the maintenance of those working relationships is really critical. Consulting with employees as you're making changes and considering making changes to whether you're going hybrid or flexible or all of these things that are happening. Just, you know, rather than people feeling that the company are making the decisions behind closed doors and then pushing them down on staff, you just need to manage that perception that you are listening to employees, you're willing to hear what they have to say, and you're consulting and engaging genuinely with them so their voice can be heard. And yeah, as I mentioned, team activities, team building, team treats, just keep that focus. I mean, there's teams and feedback coming on, you know, recognition and people still wanting to feel valued and have that acknowledgement to them. So just keeping spirits up, keeping morale up, they can go a long way. And of course, the simple thing that we often forget, which is just to continue saying thanks to people, to acknowledging work when they've done something well, or they've put an extra effort in, or they've gone the extra mile. Just, it makes a huge difference. And I think oftentimes we can downplay the impact that has for people. So just to reiterate that. So they're kind of, and there's a lot in there, but I think, you know, if you sat after the session today and looked and said, okay, what am I doing in my business in these different areas? And do I have my eyes on these different things? And hopefully I'd like to think that there's maybe 2 or 3 actions that you could take over the next 2 or 3 weeks to improve some of those areas. And everything that you do in one of those areas is going to support your retention of your employees a little bit more. Okay, so in terms of the more broader updates around the return to the workplace, obviously we're hearing all of this lingo. I think we're getting confused in the terms between flexible working, remote working, hybrid working, and it's different organizations are doing different things. Of course, we've all been remote working from home or different hubs over the last period of time, and now we're moving towards the hybrid working, which is potentially working some of the time from home or a hub and some of the time from a workplace or an office environment. Flexible working then is a little bit different in the sense that that could be people looking to work a 4-day week as opposed to a 5-day week, or working different hours and different times of the day to accommodate, the different parts of their life. So it's just being clear about what that means in your organization and mapping that out in a policy so people understand it. So kind of reflecting back on our experience of managing this over the last period of time, and kind of thought about what have been the pros and the cons of this experience that we've had. And so what we're hearing is that there's more people are appreciating more flexibility in their life and balancing. That's contributing to a better work-life balance. Excuse me. And 78% of organizations from the Barometer survey believe that flexible practices have benefited their organization. So that's been quite interesting to see, because of course there's a fear that it suited employees, but not necessarily always the organization. And 76% of organizations have flexible practices in place. So that just gives you a sense of how seriously people are taking this, the changes, I suppose, in the future work and how we're adapting. On the con side then, like what are some of the challenges that we faced? And they would be less collaboration has been an obvious barrier, and that's impacted negatively, or can impact negatively on innovation. And so we just have to be very conscious of that and thinking around how we can mitigate that in any way. Employees can feel isolated, and that has affected well-being, and we've started to see some repercussions of that, and we'll probably continue to see those escalate over time in terms of maybe stress and not communicating, not highlighting when they're struggling, and then just people just kind of retreating into themselves, maybe becoming a bit more introverted than they would have been before. So there are definitely some of the things that we've seen. Performance management has become more complicated. I think, managing people remotely requires much more clinical management, so very task-oriented management. So it's a challenge to try and maintain that warm and friendly manner that you would normally have in a one-to-one conversation, while also being quite task-oriented. So it does make it more challenging, and we have to be a bit more conscious and creative about how we manage those conversations. And in turn, then that's maybe led to issues around poor performance management and trying to give constructive feedback and how it's received, etc. And learning and development as well, being maybe we don't always have the visibility that we would have had before in terms of people's progression and learning. So that's been challenging. And then difficult to maintain the culture. So again, I think initially it was fine, but now that we're looking at potentially this being a longer term thing, I think it's very important that we're conscious of that it is more difficult to maintain your culture when people are working either hybrid or fully remote. So we definitely have to do something active to manage that and to try and capture what our culture is and to share and instill that in maybe new people that join and maintain it for people that are already in the organization. So again, I think about practically what can we do or what have we seen good things happening in other organizations that are getting it right and they're doing a good job on this. So again, as I mentioned today, the public health advice is changing all the time. So first and foremost, as we know, we've become used to this, we'll have to be following public health advice and not going against that. The next thing is to consider what your competitors are doing. So we are starting to hear of employees being poached or not necessarily always poached, but just attracted by what the competitors are promoting and talking about. And, you know, the grass is greener on the other side and that whole concept. So it is important that while we have to look at what's working in our business and what might work, we also need to consider what our competitors are doing, because our employees will be looking at that, and there's a danger that we might lose some people to other, if they're adopting flexible practices, for example, and we're saying that we're not going to, then there's definitely a flight risk there. So it has to be taken into account in that business case assessment of how you want to manage things. And engaging and listening with employees is obviously the biggest thing. So doing a lot of workshops with management teams, doing employee surveys, doing maybe focus groups or one-to-ones, and before making any actions or decisions, just really trying to do that diagnostic step of listening to what people's experience has been in terms of those pros and cons, looking at their expectations for the future, and then sitting back and looking at what the business plans are and what the strategic outlook is, and just putting that all in the melting pot together. So when you do decide what your approach is, that you've taken all of that into account. Obviously, consideration around compliance, security, GDPR, and organizational KPIs are all critical, and all things that really do need to give, we need to give real consideration to over the longer term as to how we're going to maintain that. And different organizations have different levels of flexibility on those things. Particularly when we talk about people potentially working in different time zones or countries, and you know the extra risks that brings. So it's important to be focused on that. And then updating policies. So quite a lot of organizations focusing on writing and updating their policies across all of these areas, and making sure that it's not something that just happens by default, that it's like, okay, we'll come back and we'll see how it goes, you know, taking quite a structured approach to it, updating the policies, writing it down on paper so that there's clear understanding of what we are committing to and what the next review period is, etc. A lot of organizations providing training on managing remote employees and communication in a remote workforce, and touching on some of those things I spoke about before, about performance management and maybe conflict management or stress management, or avoiding some of those issues. So taking a kind of a proactive stance on that, there's some good things happening in that space. And most organizations, certainly the advice we've been giving is to just pilot to find the best solution. So don't make a longer term commitment now. When you do your diagnostics, when you come up with your plan, just decide that you're going to try one particular way for a certain period of time. And that seems to be well received. I think what people are responding to is just that sense of control and a plan and a structure. And that seems to be giving employees confidence to stick with their businesses and just see it through and see how it maps out. And as we have been encouraged to do throughout the whole pandemic, it's continually about leadership, engaging with people, and communication around issues. So not putting our head in the sand, not avoiding the difficult conversations, kind of dealing with things head on, and just trying to lead and give that confidence to the teams. So there are a lot of the, you know, the good things that we're seeing and that we're involved with our clients that I just said I would share with you today. So some of the other stats I wanted to talk about are the whole area of remuneration. Obviously, salary and benefits is always something that we're very keen to get the latest update on. So thankfully, the stats from this really indicated a return of optimism in terms of the marketplace. So there seems to be an anticipation that business will start to return, and that, you know, our opportunities will start to increase, and we're starting to see that some of our clients now are recruiting again, resourcing and pushing forward, and actually getting a lot higher opportunities and contracts than they would have foreseen, which has been great. So I suppose this probably reflects that mood out there. And in our survey results 4 in 10, or 41% of businesses were stating that they had or they intended to increase salaries this year. So when asked the same question last year, it was just half that number at 22%. So that was clearly much more fear in the market last year, and people just not having a sense of what the future would look like. So they were kind of holding and freezing those things. Whereas now that has increased quite a lot. So the average salary increase for 2021 was reported as being 3%. And so that's just good in terms of if you're looking at your own salaries, what's the norm? It just gives you a kind of a baseline or a benchmark to consider against. And that's a potential incentive to attract and retain employees, of course, looking at salary increases. So when deciding, will we or won't we, the key considerations were around company affordability, which was 36% of the organizations were focused on that. And then company profitability was 32%. So they were the two primary considerations that organizations have, which is not surprising for implementing. And nearly a quarter of the organizations, 23%, their salaries were linked to external pay scales. So that just, again, gives you a sense of how those businesses are determining what their salary should be, that they are looking to external pay scales to direct that, not entirely, but they're taking it into account. And then 15% of salary increases are based on performance. So again, just a little bit more information around that. In terms of workplace conflicts and disputes, so again, it's been quite nice and refreshing to see that there's been a decrease in the number of organizations reporting issues around this area. So just 1 in 3, 33% of the organizations experienced employee-related disputes in 2020, and 9% of that 33 went on to attend the WRC or the Labour Court. So 8 in 10, or 86%, had to deal with an issue in 2019, with 28% attending the WRC or the Labour Court. So again, it just gives you a sense of the change. So it went from 86% to 33%. So quite a dramatic decrease in the number of organizations dealing with conflict. And, most likely we think that this was obviously caused by remote working and people not being physically present in the workplace together. So that's obviously going to reduce the potential for conflict. And then also the WRC and the Labour Court were not operating at full capacity. So that would have limited their ability to manage some of those complaints. And the union issues seem to have diminished a little bit, in the sense that in terms of conflict, because they were distracted, of course, by the COVID-19 operational challenges. And just a point to note that the primary conflict, where there is conflict, the primary reason for the conflict, or what was defined as conflict, was disciplinary issues. So that's 1 in 5 organizations were quoting that where they did have a conflict, it was around disciplinary. So again, it just highlights the importance of having robust policies in this area, and making sure that managers are trained and how to apply those policies in practice, and that they have confidence in doing it, because this is the primary and most likely conflict situation that people would be faced with. So not surprisingly, as things evolve, and again we reopen and get back to whatever normal looks like, it is anticipated that conflicts will rise again, and over the coming 12 months. So I suppose the message is, as people start to return to the workplace, maybe any of those relationship issues that were there in the past are not going to be gone. So it's just, again, to be ready and be aware of that might increase. And it just reiterates the importance of having your policies up to date, and having the managers trained and competent in how to deal with these things, because there's so many of the issues that we deal with that I find become really serious and formal, and they're really elongated because companies either didn't have the skills and experience or the policies in place to deal with them and act on issues in the very early stages. And there really is a great opportunity to get in there early and try and deal with these things informally before they escalate into formal grievances or bullying and harassment claims, etc. And, as I mentioned later on, earlier this year, we had the new code of practice on anti-bullying, and that really does put more of a requirement on organizations to try and front load and deal with issues informally and stop them from escalating, because on average they can take 3-4 months to resolve some of these more formal issues, and it really is such a distraction to the business. It can have such a devastating impact on the team and the morale and all of those things. So It's just to be aware that, you do need to be focused on making sure that managers are competent in getting in there early and facing up to things and trying to have those conversations and manage those situations. And just as a point of note, I just added in there that 55% of organisations do not formally recognise trade unions. So that was again from the survey report, which I just thought was an interesting fact. Okay, and then again, in terms of trying to be practical about it, what can we do? So if we know that there is likely to be an increase in conflict, what can we do to avoid it in the next 12 months? So ongoing communication is obviously always critical, but particularly looking at those things like effective performance management, making sure that expectations are clear on employees, and that there's clear expectations on both sides, addressing issues early, as I mentioned, and listening to concerns. I mean, a lot of the complicated cases that I deal with, people say to me, I just don't feel like the employer was listening to me. They kind of go into protecting themselves and feeling like they can't just have frank and open and honest conversations, and they're giving textbook answers. And then the employees don't respond to that, and then things escalate and they become more formal because they're not getting basic answers. So, make sure that you're genuinely engaging with employees. You're trying to understand whether it's anxiety of returning to the workplace, whether they've got COVID-19, difficulties because of maybe people that are more vulnerable at home and they're nervous to come back, or any of those kinds of issues. They're just some of the things I'm dealing with at the moment. Just genuinely engage with them, listen to them, clarify what they're asking of you. And then you can go back and consider, is that something that I can accommodate or not? And then you can consider, is it reasonable? Is it not? What capacity do we have, etc. But it's just really critical to try and maintain that connection with people and that trust and that confidence in each other to navigate through uncertain times, because once you lose that, or that's damaged, it's very, very difficult to pull that back, and you just do end up in litigation, and things just get messy. So as I mentioned, training and equipping managers is something you can do proactively, even refreshers, to give them the necessary skills and confidence to deal with these things. And of course, I always go back to the building blocks of HR, having clear grievance and dispute procedures in place. That is really critical for guiding what are your steps. So what is the first step, the second step, the third step? Because when you find yourself in those situations, it's the policies that you turn to give you that direction as to what to do next. Okay, and then my last section then, just to summarize, I've touched on all of these areas now already, but the top 5 priorities that were reported in that HR Barometer report this year were continuing to address the COVID-19 challenges, because we see, it's not gone away. We're still dealing with it. The numbers are still increasing. We still have a certain amount of anxiety. We've got issues around vaccination, and obviously we don't know who's been vaccinated and who's not been vaccinated, and we can't ask the question. We can't ask, people if they've been vaccinated or not, only in very limited situations where they might be frontline health workers, for example. So that all has to be determined by the risk assessments. And so there's still issues around that need to be addressed. Employee retention, as I mentioned, is still a key consideration. Performance management, and just trying to focus on the business growing and moving forward, and how we, from HR perspective, can support that in a proactive way. And just general employee engagement, well-being, the employee experience, and supporting employees to make that change and that transition back to the workplace and maintain that culture and that morale and that collegiality with their team. I suppose all of that piece is really critical. And then also, a lot of organizations considering much more the future of work and some of those concepts around what the future looks like and what we need to do now to be ready for that future, and whether it's short term or long term, or how we're going to start on that journey and what steps we're going to take to do that. So they're the top 5 priorities that were identified in the report. And then in terms of employment law updates, I don't have time to go through each one of these today. We could probably do a session on our own for each one of them, but just to mention them, the anti-bullying code of practice was the first one that came out in January of this year. For anyone that may not have read it yet, it does require you to update your policies and procedures, because it adds in an additional layer of a step into your bullying management policy, or your bullying management process, called the secondary informal. And as I mentioned, it's encouraging you more and more to deal with things internally. So there will be more of a requirement to train managers and equip people internally to be confident to deal with these allegations. And at the end of the session today, I'll give you a link to an ebook that I wrote back earlier this year, and it's a free to download ebook, and that will give you some highlight information on that code of practice and some of the changes that you need to make. We also had a code of practice on the right to disconnect that came through in April of this year, and I will mention that briefly on the next slide. And statutory sick pay was launched or communicated in June of 2021. That's something that had been long awaited. We knew it was coming in, we just didn't know exactly what they were going to recommend. So I'll run through that now in a second. And then the latest one, I just said I'd flag to you for anyone that hadn't seen it yet. We had a code of practice in determining employment status. And so that's the difference between employees and contractors and the whole gig economy and all of that space. So for any of you that might be affected by that, it's definitely worth a read, just to make sure you're at the cutting edge of that, because again, it's very topical. It can result in a lot of cases and difficulties. So it's important that we are up to date on that one. And as I mentioned, the right to disconnect. So this is the code of practice. You can download it from the WRC website, and it was published in April. So this gives an obligation on employers to have a policy in place on the right to disconnect. So again, it's a new policy that is required, and it has three main elements. It has the right to not routinely work beyond agreed overtime. It also allows for no penalisation for refusal of staff who refuse to work beyond their normal working hours. And it also includes a requirement for us as employers to respect people's right to disconnect. So it refers to really emails and calls after hours. And really that's the fundamental principle of the document. It's that, people are allowed the opportunity to have work time and have home time. And that the line between both of those has been becoming more and more blurred. So we as employers just have to be very conscious of how we're managing that. So just, if you haven't written a policy on this, I think it's important that goes on the to-do list, and you're kind of ahead of that in managing that situation. And then the new statutory sick pay scheme that was announced. So they're phasing that in over a number of years. So in 2022, there's going to be a requirement for 3 days sick leave to be covered by the employer. In 2023, that's going to increase to 5 days. In 2024, that will increase to 7 days. And in 2025, that will increase up to 10 days. So this is something that they were under pressure to do for quite a long time, because they're trying to bring Ireland in line with other EU countries. So it is something that we need to start budgeting for, planning for, preparing for over, from next year onwards. So in terms of the guidelines within that scheme, what they're really trying to do is close the gap between the current waiting days before illness benefit kicks in. So at the moment, it's 6 days, and so people were just not entitled to payment. So they're just looking to close that gap. There is a requirement to have a minimum of 6 months service before employees would be entitled to paid sick leave from their employers. And of course, important to note that they must have a medical certificate to avail of it. So it has to be certified sick leave in order to avail of this statutory sick pay from their employer. In terms of the level of payment, it's 70% of an employee's wage, subject to a daily threshold of 110 euros. So it's not an open ceiling. There is a cap on it, but it's 70% of the employee's salary. Top-ups are allowed, of course. So if an employer does want to make that 100%, or they want to take that ceiling off it and just have a blanket rule of 70% of an employee's wage, you're perfectly entitled to do that. but that just lays out for you what the minimum is, what the compliance levels are. And there is a requirement as a result of this, obviously, to update your sick leave and your benefit policy to make sure that that change has been captured. Okay, so they're kind of the main things I wanted to run through with you today. Just to summarize, assess your flight risks, which is probably a funny way to think and talk about people, but I think it is important to sit and look at your team and look at each person and think about where they're at. And, particularly if they're a key member of your team with strong skill set and a person that you really want to retain, you have to look at what is attractive for them in staying with this organization, what might be the options for them to go elsewhere, and what can I do to make the environment here, better for them, to solidify them in the team, and have an open conversation with them and make sure that you have a sense of where they're at so that you're not taken by surprise by any sudden resignations. And just to reiterate the importance of leading staff through the return to work, the workplace, I should say. So, we're hearing from a lot of employers that it's just that trust and confidence that employees have in either their managers or in their businesses as a whole. And it's really critical for them to feel that they can continue to commit to their employers, that they feel that the owners and managers are on top of the whole management of the return, management of the new ways of working, and consideration of flexible, remote, hybrid working, all of these things. So have open conversations with them, gather their information, give them a sense that you're in control, that you have a plan, that you're piloting something, that you review it at 3 months or 6 months, feedback regularly, and don't break the commitments. Just follow through on that plan and that approach that you're taking. And then finally, with so many changes going on this year from those different codes of practice, and then those different flexible arrangements that might be in place, now is the time, if you haven't already, to do a review of all of your policies and make sure that you're ready to close out the year with that all done, so that for next year you're completely up to date with all of your policy documentation, because it is the fundamental baseline of managing HR and managing people is your policies. And if they're wrong or not up to date, or they have gaps in them, they will make the practical application of the issues much more difficult, which will end up in more litigation and probably cost you more in settlements. So it's definitely worth the time to just get that baseline clear and solid. And it has changed quite significantly in the last number of months. So just that's definitely one of the recommendations I would give to everyone today. So that's it in terms of our content. Then just to reiterate the partnership program that we have with the Chamber, as I spoke about at the start of the session, we do provide a comprehensive overview where, as I mentioned, we will do all of that policy review and do that all for you and guide you through those changes and guide you through the practical application of any live issues that you might have and support you in actually following through on those things as part of the partnership program. So if anyone is interested in finding out more, feel free to get in touch with me after the session today, and I would be happy to explore that with you a little bit further. I just always flag, given the environment that we're in now, that Adair do provide ergonomic assessment training for any employees that are working remotely, and so that you can maintain your obligations from a health and safety perspective. And we can provide training, but also the assessment of what the workstation setup that people have, and I'd be able to identify any gaps that might be there in terms of equipment, and satisfy that obligation that is on employers to make sure that they're providing a safe place of work for their employees, even when they're working remotely. So if anyone is interested in that, I'm sure the Chamber will share the slides with you after the session, but these are the links to the Dignity at Work anti-bullying ebook that I mentioned. I've also included their return to work checklist, which you can download, and this new vaccination we just launched this week, this new ebook that I've written this week around the whole area of vaccinations. I know I didn't touch on it a huge amount today, but there's a whole load of information in that to guide you around considerations in terms of vaccinations in the workplace as well. So hopefully you'll find those useful. And as I mentioned there, my contact details, if anyone wants to follow up with me after the session, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that you might have. And I look forward to talking to you over the coming weeks and months. So I'll hand back to you now, Anthony. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks very much, Michelle, for what was a very comprehensive presentation. I'll say that thank you. It was very informative. We have a couple of questions in, so we could probably put you on the spot if that's all right.
Great.
Just coming through in the chat box. One of them is, can we ask individuals who are not vaccinated to not attend the workplace?
So there's a danger that they could argue then that they're being discriminated against if we're having very clear rules between treating people differently that are vaccinated and that are not vaccinated. So I would say that we can't have a blanket rule like that in place, but really the things that should determine those sorts of decisions are the risk assessment that you do. So if there's a particular reason that you require people to be vaccinated, then that's something that should come out from your risk assessment. There's also a danger that, remember, from a GDPR perspective, you're not allowed to share vaccination status with other people. So it makes it more obvious if the employer is asking people to self-select, effectively it becomes very clear who's been vaccinated and who's not been vaccinated if you were to put a policy like that in place. So that would be contrary to the GDPR. So I would say no is a simple answer in terms of blanket rule. And really you should, if you were going to go down that kind of a route, you should have that validated through risk assessment.
Yet when you go to a restaurant, you're going to have to flash a badge as such, the fellow said, to gain entry to dine inside. Yeah. So in the workplace, and this is even I'm my own point of view, but if somebody comes into the workplace, because it's going to be an issue, like it's going to be, I can just imagine it. So if somebody's not going to allow them in, like what are the implications for the employer? There's two parts of this. One is for the employer and the other is for the employee. Are there implications there? I'm just expanding on the question I was asked. I have a couple more after this. So.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So it's all about what the public health advice is, and even the Data Protection Commissioner released an update relatively recently on vaccinations, and even in that communication they talk about the public health advice. So even they are relying on the public health advice. So right now the public health advice says that if we want to go to a restaurant, we have to produce our COVID cert in order to go inside, but it doesn't have that requirement for workplaces in general. So therefore, there's no mandate, there's no entitlement of employers to apply that same policy. So by default of the advice, they've kind of created that situation for us. And then in terms of other employees, yeah, we just have to be very careful that even though people are vaccinated, there's still a requirement to maintain all of the same safety protocols that would have been in place in terms of mask wearing and social distancing, etc. Because of course, we're still seeing lots of numbers of people that are vaccinated and are still being infected with COVID-19. So even people that are vaccinated can still spread COVID-19 in the same way. So, being vaccinated doesn't remove the risk completely.
Yeah, I think it's probably like it's going to be a Pandora's box issue in the next couple of months as people return to the workplace, and there's all sorts of permutations. People are coming back part-time, people are coming back 2 days a week, they're sharing desks, but I'm in Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, somebody else on Thursday, Friday, and I think it's going to be a very fluid situation when it comes to returning to work. There's a lot of people are nervous. There's one of another question came in from Ruth Burton. Would you suggest a questionnaire to employees prior to returning to work and about returning to work, or would you have a discussion?
Absolutely, I would think it depends on the size of the business. I mean, I know in some of our smaller clients, even I myself, any of the clients I would manage, I have phoned individually all of the staff, but that's maybe where they had 10 or 15 employees. So it's obviously much more practical, and you have that relationship with people. In larger businesses, we would recommend running a survey with staff, and like we're doing a lot of that at the moment. Even this week, I have 2 companies that I'm writing surveys for at the moment. So that's the way that we're going. And then in terms of the management team, certainly for those larger ones, we're just taking a cross section of the management team to try and get a sense of what their concerns and issues are. And we're doing that via maybe a 2-hour workshop, for example, where we're just having an open conversation. Obviously, there's a bit of structure to it, but it's about trying to pull out what have been the pros, what have been the cons, what are the challenges, what do they foresee, and then trying to put that information together with what the employee expectations and experience has been, as I mentioned, and then trying to come up with something that we can propose as a way forward to marry both of those perspectives.
Okay. And we know ourselves from discussions with our own membership that quite a number of the bigger organizations have put in questionnaires for their employees.